In part 1 of this mini-series, I prepared a pie inside this tin and mostly successfully replicated the Fray Bentos pie canning process. But the true objective of this project is to try to make Tarte Tatin inside one of these things. I'm going to make my own puff pastry, and since we're making Tarte Tatin, I'm going to use French butter. So I've got 250 grams of plain flour. I need 200 grams of butter, helpfully marked out in 25-gram increments on the pack here actually, but I will weigh it. And just to stop the butter sticking to that, I'll put a bit of that flour in there and then zero it, and we'll have that back in a moment. There we go. About 50 grams of this butter is going to go into the flour straight away. The rest I'll set aside for now. And I need to rub this fat into this flour. So I could do that with my fingertips, but as you can see I've got a bit of a boo-boo on there. Just my thumbnail's not particularly pretty at this stage of healing, and so I've covered it up to save your eyes. So I will use this rubbing in tool. This is just a set of blunt knives that we do that with. And it cuts the butter into the flour, emulating what would happen if you rubbed it in with your fingertips. Okay, that is only part of the fat, but that bit gets rubbed into the dough at this stage. Next, I want about 7 or 8 tablespoons of liquid in here, mostly water. One of those tablespoons is going to be cider vinegar. Not really sure what that does actually. Most recipes call for lemon juice. Cider vinegar is what I happen to have. So that's one of my tablespoons of liquid. Then I want another 6 or 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to go straight for 7 because I think it is going to be 8 in total. And then I'll just bring that together into a dough. In fact, I think it needs another one. Yeah, that's right. Now we're going to have that shaggy dough out onto a surface where I can work it. And I'm going to bring that together, and I am going to knead this. Often with pastry you don't want to knead it, but with flaky puff pastry you definitely do. We've got to work this to develop the gluten a little bit, because this pastry is going to form layers, so it needs to have some coherence to the dough. We don't want it to be crumbly, we want it to be flaky. Yeah, and that's about the right texture actually, so that's a soft dough, not sticky, but with enough moisture that it's going to properly develop the gluten. I'll have a little bit of flour now. I can feel the gluten starting to tighten up now, and so it's just becoming a bit stiffer for kneading, which is an indication that we're probably okay to stop kneading now and let that rest for a bit. So I'll just flour it, cover it up, and I'll let that rest in a cool place, which happens to be right here in the kitchen. Okay, that's enough rest for now. Now I just need to roll that out into a oblong. See, the dough's resisting me, but that's fine. So I've divided my butter into 3 equal amounts, and what we do is we'll take 1/3 of that butter, and I'm going to cut it into little slices and arrange this butter on 2/3 of this dough. Might be that there's too much butter here, so we might have to do this in 4 portions. I'm leaving a little margin around the edge here, and then just with a bit of water, I'm just going to moisten around the edge of this piece just to help it seal, and then 1/3 into the middle, and then the other third. Doesn't matter that it's a bit rough at the moment, it will sort itself out. And then very gently roll this. I'm looking to smear that butter in between the layers rather than have it punch through the dough. And I don't want to squeeze it out the ends either. So something like that. And yeah, rolling in both directions and from the ends into the middle as well, just so that we're not squeezing all of the butter into one place. Now we're in a position to do the same again with that butter. So next bit of butter, And actually, I'm probably going to divide this into quarters rather than thirds, just because of how it's going. And then again, arrange pieces of butter onto 2/3 of the dough. Moisten around the edge, fold 1/3, fold 2/3, and press down. And repeat. So again, I'm just going to roll this really gently for now. And what I might do now is just let that rest for 10 minutes. All right, so we're on what's probably the last lamination of butter now. And so what we're doing every time we add butter in here and then fold it and roll it, we're creating interleaved layers of butter and dough that are getting thinner and thinner. And that creates the structure of the pastry. So there's no leavening in here. This pastry is not made with self-raising flour or anything. This pastry will be leavened by steam, pulling the layers apart as it bakes. And the butter will cause those layers to come apart because it stops the dough sticking to itself. Well, I think it might actually be one more after this as well. You can do it with the butter all in one big layer. So in commercial bakeries, when they make flaky pastry or they make dough for croissants, they will use a great big slab of butter. I don't have a dough sheeter, so if you want to do it at home, it's often easier to do it with the butter in little bits like this. So we'll give that one more roll. And if at any point the dough starts to toughen up and become difficult to roll, you just cover it up, put it somewhere cool, let it relax a little bit. So that's the end of the butter to add in. Actually, I'll probably just do this half and half rather than 1/3. Like that. And then give it a little roll into the bag. And we'll let that rest for 20 minutes probably. So that's had a little rest. I'm just going to roll it out again. And we're going to fold it a few more times. Strictly speaking, I should be keeping count, but we'll just do it till it looks about right. Now this is the opportunity to get this back into a more regular shape. So now what we'll do is fold it like that. I might just use a little bit more water just to stick it down, make it stick to itself. And then we'll give it a roll this way. And again, now we can just use this as an opportunity to neaten it up a bit. And there we go. Right, so off camera I did another couple of cycles of roll and fold, and we should have like hundreds of layers by this time. And that's now ready to rest somewhere cool while we prepare the pie filling. I'm just going to move my pastry equipment to one side because we will need that back in a moment. Apples. Little Granny Smith hard green sour apples. Probably the best variety for this. And to stop those from going brown while I work, I've just got a bowl of water there, and again I'm just going to put a little bit of vinegar in there. Lemon juice would work just as well, but just a little dash of something acidic. So we've got the vinegar mother in there as well. Actually, we didn't really want that. So the plan here is peel the apples, and legend has it that if you peel an apple in one movement like that without breaking the skin and then toss that over your shoulder, it will form on the floor the initials of your true love. Let's give that a try. Okay, and I kid you not, that is a J for Jenny. That was lucky, wasn't it? So, I've just cored this apple. I've got an apple corer, which just punched through. And then we just halve those, and that's that. Now I'm going to prepare 5 apples. I think that should be enough for my little can, but it obviously depends on the size of the tart you're making. And into here I'm going to put about maybe 25 grams of butter. I'm just going to put it in very thin slices on the bottom, like this. This will cook together with the apple juice and the sugar to make a sort of caramel. But I'm just going to put that in pieces like that. See, normally with Tarte Tatin, you'd fry it in a frying pan, put the pastry over the top, and then put the whole thing in the oven. We're not doing that here. We're doing a kind of all-in-one baked version, which may or may not work. So the butter has to go in there, and then we arrange apple pieces into here, as best we can. Don't think we're going to get that many in here. No, actually, before the apple pieces go in, I'm being stupid here. Before the apple pieces go in, I've got 100 grams of sugar here. I don't know if I'm going to use this all, but we'll put a scattering of sugar across the bottom. This is soft brown sugar. That's probably about 30 grams. And then my apple halves, we will arrange as neatly as possible into the dish. Oh, that's not bad. Yeah, that's not bad. More sugar over the top. There's no cinnamon in a classic Tarte Tatin. It's just apples, butter, sugar and pastry. And this because it's a French dish. French cuisine is often characterized by only having a few ingredients but really doing good stuff with them. So I think a lot of people would probably argue that if you feel like Tarte Tatin needs cinnamon, you've not understood how good apples and sugar and butter are on their own. The remaining half of an apple here, I'm not going to waste it. I think we'll just slice that up and put it across the bottom here, just so we've got enough apple to actually make a filling. Something like that. And now I've got to put some pastry on that. Okay, pastry is back, and we shouldn't have to fold this anymore. And just give it a good roll out now. And because this pastry has been worked a lot, it will tend to shrink back. So the gluten in here is really quite well developed because of all of this bashing it around, rolling it, folding it and whatnot. So we'll just need a little rest now and again. I've rolled that a bit thinner than I did on the meat pie yesterday. I'm going to roll it thinner still. And that is deliberate because that was just a bit too much pastry on that thing. So this one will go nice and thin. And we're going to make it a bit bigger than this lid. I'm not going to cut it right from the middle of the piece either. I think we'll go for up there. So what I'll do is actually cut that to the size of the lid first. Nice neat circle of dough. We'll do something fun with the remnants in a minute. And then this circle, just ease it a bit bigger with the rolling pin. Looks about right. So what has to happen now is I've got to tuck that down like this. Not bad. Lid on. That's tight. And the restraint. Make sure I've got that central in the tin. I'll do that up nice and tight. In case you've only landed on episode 2 here and you don't really know what all of this nonsense is about, here's a link to episode 1 where all of the rationale for what I'm doing here, if you can call it that, is explained. Oh yeah, I said I was going to do something interesting with the, or did I say fun? With this remaining dough, or some of it. So let's do that. Pizza cutter. Zoom. And then we'll go zoom. And then and I think that will be a tiny croissant. I did also just remember that I haven't put a circle of parchment inside of here, so I'll just open that up and remedy that problem. So, second verse, same as the first. That goes in the pressure cooker.
This seems like an appropriate moment to stop for a word or two about safety. It's important to note that I'm about to use my pressure cooker in a way that is outside of its specification, and the same is true for the sealed stainless steel vessel I'm going to put inside it. I've taken steps to satisfy and mitigate my own concerns about potential risks, but remember, I'm just some idiot on the internet, so you shouldn't copy what I'm doing here. I can only be responsible for my own safety to the best of my ability, and then as well subject to whatever harms may arise from my own actions or failures or negligence. Your safety is your own responsibility. I do not endorse anything you see in this video as safe enough for anyone else to attempt or imitate.
In case you're thinking, why is he pressure cooking Tarte Tatin? You probably really need to go and watch part 1. Okay, we'll close that up, lock it down. 45 minutes, pressure cook with natural steam release. Go. Okay, here we are again. Let's see what we've got waiting for us inside of here. Just pressing the top of the tin just to see, to make a judgment on whether that's still under pressure. I think it's okay. Yeah, I can squeeze it, so that's fine. Again, we've got fat floating in the steam bath there. That's going to be butter that's come out of the pastry, I suppose. Let us see what awaits inside this time. I'm quite excited. Are you? Okay, that's that bit. Lid's just going to need a tiny bit of assistance coming off. There we go. Okay, well, it hasn't completely filled the container, and I kind of expected that because obviously there wasn't a full tin of apple filling there. It looks like it might have worked. As before, I'm going to let that cool down completely, and then we'll bake it. I think there are probably several reasons why this might not work as a canned product, and one of them is that it has sunk since it's cooled down. Now that would be a problem inside the can, because that would mean when it's stacked on its edge to be put on a shop shelf, the pastry might sag down. So that's a potential reason. I think there are others, and I'll talk about them in a minute. I'm going to bake this at a lower temperature for a little bit longer than I do normally with a Fray Bentos pie. But I think that's okay because I'm in charge of this bit. So that's going on at 190 Celsius, and I'm going to give it half an hour and then check in on it. We're at the 15-minute mark and it's starting to rise. That's the half hour, and I'm inclined to give it another 5 to 10 minutes. Have a look. I might just stick a knife down the side and check the colour of the caramel. Right, there it is. Now that hasn't risen as much as I might have expected, but let's press on. Now there is a tricky bit here, and this I suspect is the main reason why this would never be a Fray Bentos product. We have to turn this out. We have to do that while it's still hot and the caramel is still molten, and that is hazardous. And it kind of doesn't matter how carefully you do this, you can still come a cropper. So what I'm going to do actually here is put my, so I've got a heat-proof glove, we'll put a plate on top, we'll do that. Okay, that I think is probably the biggest issue with the idea of this being a Fray Bentos product, is that would have to happen, and that's a potential for people to burn themselves. Right, so it hasn't caramelized quite as much as I might have hoped on the top there, and yet the apples are overcooked. The pressure canning process basically destroys the apple. You have to resist the temptation to taste this hot sugar. That is going to be scalding hot and would just burn the skin off your tongue. Anyway, it's not terrible. Not everything I might have hoped for there, but I think it might taste okay. On the plus side, I'm pretty happy with my little weird mini croissants. They're not bad. Okay, so look, this did not work out as I hoped. But I've got to give it a taste anyway. Well, there's a lovely crunch on the crust there. That's very Fray Bentos, lots of doughy layers, 1 or 2 crispy layers. The top crust is unusually crispy though, actually. I imagine that's probably the sugar worked its way up into the crust during the steaming process. We'll have that with a scoop of vanilla ice cream. And let's give it a taste. The flavour is absolutely superb. And some of that is that French butter. So buttery. Yeah, I mean that's 8 out of 10 for flavour. Just really suffering on presentation. And I think I might have just steamed it too long. I don't know how long Fray Bentos pies get in the pressure steamer oven in the factory. Maybe it isn't 45 minutes. But this is obviously not one of their recipes. I might have another go at this and just try steaming it for 20 minutes. Flavour wise, it's pretty much there. It could probably do with a bit more caramelisation, but it's not bad. And yeah, apple, butter, sugar, pastry. It's just a wonderfully simple but delightful combination. And here in the tasting, we've stumbled upon another reason why this would never be a Fray Bentos product. You couldn't possibly replace the butter with palm oil and have it taste nearly as good as this. So what's slightly peculiar about this one is the pastry didn't really delaminate. And I wonder if that's to do with the sugar or the extra moisture from the apples. It's not the pastry itself. I'll demonstrate that in a moment. I mean, but as I say, this is the last piece now. The flavour is superb. And the pastry definitely has performed differently this time. That bottom crust, which was the top crust, is almost glassy in the way it cracks. So yeah, maybe we need to have another go at this with a shorter time in the pressure cooker. Here's how I know it wasn't the pastry that was the problem. All of those layers. It's the next day. There has to be another attempt on that because I can see some reasons why that didn't work out so well, and we can't possibly end on a question. Spoiler, we're going to end on a question, but a different one. I'm going to remake that with some changes. One of the changes is I'm not making my own pastry this time. I went and bought some all butter puff pastry. We'll use ready-made. Whilst I do like making pastry, it takes a long time. I'm going to put butter in the bottom as before. This is the last of my French butter, so we will still have a French butter flavour to this tart. Do you know what? I might just go and melt this butter on the hob. That's probably enough heat just to melt that butter. I'll turn that off. It will probably continue melting. And we'll start with a sprinkling of sugar in there as well to mix with that butter. I did lick the spoon. It was delicious. Now I got for apples, I've got some Granny Smiths again, but I've also got some little Pink Lady apples. Pink Lady is a variety that has pink flesh inside. I'll just put a bit of lemon juice in this water. We will have the core out of these apples. They don't look very pink inside, but we'll see. And this time I'm going to slice the apples. So we'll cut slices, and actually I'm going to try to keep the slices together like this. Don't know if you can see what I'm doing there. Yeah, hopefully you can. I'm going to try and keep the slices together in a little stack. Give them a brief dunk in that water with lemon juice just to stop them browning. And then arrange them in a little arc in here. Now, having the apples sliced like this instead of halved, I'm hoping it's going to give me a better fill of apple pieces, and leaving the skins on will hopefully leave them looking more intact. Hopefully as well occupy this space better than the halves of apple did. I shall just continue filling this tin with these apple slices as neatly as I can and solidly as I can. Might get a couple more in there. Back in a moment when that's done. Okay, so that's the first layer. I tried to get it as neat as I could, but it's not perfect, but we'll see. I put a bit of sugar on there, and then I'm going to fill in the rest of the pie with tiny chunks of apple. But again, I'm leaving the skins on. But this stuff, I just want it to pack down reasonably tightly. I want to see if I can get maybe 2 more apples in there. The rationale here is to fill this up as much as possible so that it presses down on that bottom layer of apples, which is the decorative bit, and hopefully preserves the appearance of that. Okay, I think I might get 1 more apple in there. Okay, we have got 5 whole apples in there, including their skins. That's more apple than we had in version 1. I think I said I was going to put 5 apples in the first version, but I didn't actually get 5 apples in there. It only ended up being like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 apple halves. Only about 3 apples in the first one. Do you know what? I think we could get 1 more in there. I think we could. Let's have a go. So, that's another half an apple. I think we can go further. So what I'm doing when I put these apples in this acidified water is just spread them apart with my thumb like that to let it get in between the slices. But keeping it together, that mattered more when I was trying to arrange them on the bottom of the thing, but it also just makes it easier then to slice these into little bits like that. How much more apple can we get on there? And that is sticking up a bit on top now, but I think I can probably press it down. I think there's still room for pastry on there. The ready rolled stuff is quite thin. Let's have a go. I didn't put very much sugar in there, and I think that's fine. This is a dessert apple. I mean, Granny Smith is a dessert apple as far as we're concerned here in England, although it's often used for cooking. I'll just pull that back from the edge there a little bit, so we've got a little space to put the pastry down the side. I think I will just put a light sprinkling of sugar over the top here, and that will percolate down through the apple as it cooks. That goes aside now, and we'll get the pastry ready. And getting this pastry ready consists of unrolling it. I do want to cut a disc slightly bigger than my lid, and I don't want to roll this out thinner. So I've got a plate that is ever so slightly larger than my lid. That will be my template. I think this is going to need a little bit of flour on it, just so it doesn't stick to the plate. Wow, it's very soft on there. And okay, right, that looks a mess, and it is, but that's fine. Again, we need a circle of parchment on here. Now, do you know what? I'm going to use a fresh bit of parchment because that's just all wet. And then to get that into a shape approximating the circle, you just fold it in half again, and keep going like that. Hold it so it's kind of more or less in the middle. Cut around the edge, and then that's that. Lid on, and that does need a bit of squeezing down, but I'm not sad about that. Restrain and screw tight. And then it's time to get the pressure cooker out again. And while that's happening, I'll do something with the rest of this pastry. I'll probably make some little jam tarts or something. As before, that goes in there and lock down. 20 minutes, pressure cook, natural release. As I say, that might not be enough time if we were going to try to preserve this for shelf-stable storage, but I don't know. Good luck, little pie. Okay, time is up once again. Let's see what's going on in here this time. Well, this is becoming quite familiar by now. It doesn't feel like it's under pressure anymore. I can feel a bit of give in the lid. There is less fat floating in the water this time, and that's probably just because that commercial butter puff is not going to have as much butter in it probably as mine did. I did go quite heavy on the butter, but anyway, we've just got to wait for that to cool down now before we try to open it. Okay, third time may or may not be the charm. Okay, well, that's unusual. Very lumpy looking pastry. The parchment has stuck to the lid of the thing rather than the pastry, and it's still below the surface of the thing here. So again, this pastry is sunk down, the apple's cooked down. But we won't know what this is going to be like until we bake it. That needs to cool down for a bit first, and then we'll have a go at baking it. Okay, time for this version to go in the oven now. I'm going to go back up to 200 degrees Celsius for this and do it for 25 minutes because dropping the temperature on the last one didn't seem to help. I'm also going to put this directly on the shelf because I feel like the heat underneath the tin will caramelise the sugar a bit better. If it drips, it'll only drip on my jam tarts. And that's going to be in there for 25 minutes. We've got about 9 minutes left to go for the pie. The jam tarts are done though. They did spill over a little bit, And that is the problem with using puff pastry, I suppose, for jam tarts. It expands and it ejects the jam. I'm sure they're going to taste okay, though. The pie, well, it's starting to rise, but the last few minutes with these pies, with the Fray Bentos pies, are usually the critical ones. Okay, this is it. And I think that looks all right from there. In fact, that might end up being the thumbnail, depending on how this next bit goes. While this is still piping hot straight out of the oven, and we're talking hot sugar, I've got to try to free it from the edge. That doesn't seem to be too bad. Now I'm at a slight disadvantage here because unlike the Fray Bentos cans, this tin does not have a flared edge. It's actually got this little bump here, which makes it a little harder to turn out. Right, so that can is going onto that glove. Like I say, this is the really dicey bit. Onto the plate, immediately inverted. Can is not desperately hot for dry fingers. Oh, I think that might be not too bad. It still lacks caramelization. That might just be because I didn't put enough sugar in there. It might be because I didn't bake it for long enough. It might be all sorts of things. It might be because it's never been fried, whereas Tarte Tatin's normally fried in the pan before it's baked. So it might just be that, but I think we've probably got a presentable apple tart at the very least. So that now needs to cool down because this is ideally enjoyed at room temperature. Right, it's time to give this a try. Nice crisp crackle on the crust. So just looking at the pastry, there is a thin doughy layer on top, but it looks fairly crisp. I would call it an acceptable crust. It cuts very nicely. Yeah, I don't think it quite looks the part because it lacks the caramelization, but everything stayed where it should be, and the presentation of the apple slices worked as I'd hoped. Scoop of vanilla ice cream. I shall take that one in for Jenny, and I'll come back and taste mine. Okay, well, here goes. Really nice crackly crunch on the crust there. Doesn't taste as buttery as yesterday's because there isn't as much butter in there, but it's still good. There is a slight caramel flavour, but that's coming from the crust, because on the bottom of the crust, where the sugar and the apple juice boiled up during canning, that's then caramelised on the crust, and so there is a little bit of a caramel flavour, but it's coming from the crust rather than the apples. And the green apples in the middle, the colour of the green apples in the middle is not all that attractive. I mean, it's an apple tart that came out of a tin. I hesitate to say that is an authentic Tarte Tatin because I know how good an authentic Tarte Tatin can be. This is good, and when you consider that, assuming all of my calculations are correct, this could have come from a shelf-stable sealed can. I actually think it probably deserves appreciation in that regard alone. That, I think, is the end of the cooking. I think we'll just go back to Studio Shrimp now for a wrap-up and conclusions and what have we learned and what comes next.
Studio Shrimp here. That was an interesting little journey, but what can we possibly conclude from it? I don't think it proved anything, but I think it does tentatively demonstrate that a shelf-stable, bake-at-home apple tart in a can is a thing that could be made to exist. I can't be completely sure that my fake canning process is fully analogous to the conditions that a truly canned product would experience, but I feel like it was close enough for a reasonably fair comparison. The main thing that's important to replicate here is the cooking of the pastry inside the can. Unavoidable in the case of Fray Bentos pies, but an explicit choice for me in trying to replicate them. In all three of the experiments in this little series so far, it certainly was the case that the puff pastry was transformed by cooking during my amateur makeshift home pressure steaming attempt. There was leakage of the can contents as they boiled and expanded, which is undesirable since that's inevitably changing the composition of the stuff inside the can. I did consider using a can that had a silicone seal ring in the lid to try to keep everything sealed tight, but I wasn't sure if that might be a really terrible idea, so I didn't. I did anticipate some of the reasons why a canned version of Tarte Tatin might just not be practical, feasible, or desirable to make as a canned product. For example, I knew all along that this thing would need to be turned out of the tin whilst still boiling hot, and that really is quite a significant obstacle to this being a commercial product, especially when it's in a can that doesn't have a handle like a frying pan does. And to be fair, Fray Bentos cans are even harder to hold on to than the metal tin I used. People would burn themselves with hot sugar, and this would result in litigation and reputation damage to the brand. I also sort of guessed that the amount of butter, especially French butter if you want that authentic flavour, required to make this product special is probably a deal breaker, at least for the Fray Bentos range of products, and replacing it with some other fat would make it not worth eating. But a couple of the issues only fully dawned on me once I was running through the process. Obviously this is not my first time cooking with apples, but I think it is the first time where it's really mattered a lot that they reduce down in volume when cooked. Fray Bentos cans are typically full to the brim, mostly with gravy, but regardless there's very little void space in the tin. With apples, up to a quarter of the volume of the fruit itself is air, integrated throughout the flesh of the apple like a sponge. And this air comes out when they're cooked. And this would settle and create a void which would potentially allow the contents, including the crust, to sag inside the can if it was displayed standing up on a shelf as Fray Bentos pies typically are. That problem could be overcome by cooking the apple first to drive out the air, but then it's going to be difficult to assemble it into a presentable tart. Maybe a different fruit is the answer, but then it's not a classic Tarte Tatin. The exercise hammered home that for this particular dish there's also a lot more criticality because the product has to be turned out after cooking. I held back on the sugar in mine, which had the dual effect of making it turn out quite easily, but also not caramelising a lot. But for a properly caramelised full sugar Tarte Tatin, there's a pretty precise sweet spot where it's cooked just right and the sugar is caramelised just enough, but not too much, and is sticky, but not so sticky that half the filling stays in the pan. It's anything but a complex dish in composition. There are 4 ingredients, but it does have hidden complexities in the execution. So, in conclusion, there are lots of reasons, obvious and otherwise, why this dish probably won't be coming to a canned food aisle near you. But this still wasn't a pointless exercise, because I enjoy tackling problems. Because it made me think. I learned a thing or two. I got to practice my puff pastry method. And above all, I had fun. The jam tarts and other side dishes were pretty nice too. I hope you enjoyed watching. Oh, I said I would end on a question, so here it is. Okay, what about pineapple upside down cake in a can? Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.